Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the movies you watch are doing more than just entertaining you? What if they're actively scripting your reality? In this explainer, we're going to dive into the powerful idea that film might just be one of the most effective forms of social programming on the entire planet.
I mean, think about it. Where do those weird, widespread beliefs really come from? You know the ones I'm talking about. The ideas that just seem to be in the air. Everyone kind of knows them, but nobody can ever seem to pinpoint exactly where they started.
So, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to start with a really curious case from Nigeria. This persistent, widespread belief in so-called money rituals. And what began as a pretty local investigation, well, it ended up revealing something way, way bigger, something universal.
Right, so Section 1, the curious rabbit hole. This investigation, it didn't just turn up a simple answer. Nope. It led researchers down a rabbit hole so deep that it made them question the very nature of how we form our beliefs about the world around us. The big question became, where were these ideas actually coming from? Was it, old folklore, some ancient tradition passed down through generations? The real answer was something nobody saw coming.
Because the research uncovered a pretty stunning twist. The origin point, the place where most of these beliefs really started, it didn't come from real-life events at all.
That's right, you heard me. The source was movies. The powerful stories that were shaping how an entire population understood wealth, ambition, and even danger, they were being written, shot, and broadcast on screen. Okay, so to really understand how this works on a massive scale, let's compare the kind of cultural programming that comes out of two cinematic giants, Hollywood, right here in the US, and Nollywood in Nigeria.
So here you can see these two completely different social scripts, side by side. It's fascinating. On one hand, you've got Hollywood, which has spent decades training its audience to expect a hero, right? The good guy wins. One person can save the day. But then you have Nigeria's Nollywood, which trains its audience for survival. It teaches that sudden wealth is always suspicious, and that life is basically a constant spiritual battle. So the result of all that Hollywood programming is what you could call a hero-centric culture. The focus is always on that individual savior, a superhero, a lone detective. And this subtly teaches us that massive, complex problems are solved by one great person, instead of, by fixing the actual system. Now, Nollywood's films, they're playing a totally different game. They aren't just movies. They're basically cautionary tales dressed up as entertainment. They are constantly reinforcing this worldview of suspicion and survival, framing everyday life as this relentless struggle against forces both seen and unseen. So, how does this actually happen? How does a fictional story on a screen literally jump out into the real world and become a shared belief that people live by? Well, the mechanism behind it all is something called a social construct. Now, a social construct is basically what happens when a story gets told so many times that it becomes a culture's default setting. It's not a belief because it's true, it's a belief because it's familiar. Think about money, right? It's just paper or numbers on a screen, but we all believe in the story of its value, so it works. The key isn't truth, it's just a shared idea we've all gotten used to. And the path from a movie plot to a real-world belief is a pretty simple three-step process. First up, repetition. A certain story, a type of character, an idea, it shows up in movie after movie after movie. Next, that leads to familiarity. It just becomes a cultural shorthand that everybody gets. And finally, normalization. The internal logic of that story, whether it's a hero will save us or trust no one, becomes an accepted default belief. So this all leads us to a really powerful and honestly a pretty provocative final idea, that movies are acting as a kind of unwritten constitution for society. Now, this challenges our whole approach to understanding a culture. The argument here is that if you truly want to get to the heart of what a society believes, what it values, you shouldn't start with its official rulebooks, its laws. Instead, you should study its movies, because they are the real constitution. They're the documents that spell out a culture's biggest hopes, its deepest fears, and its fundamental expectations about how the world works. They are literally the code that programs reality. Which, of course, leaves us with one final and I think really crucial question to think about. I mean, look at the films and the shows that you consume every single day. What are their repeated messages? What expectations are they setting in your mind? What stories are programming you?